Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, up next we have our Spotlight presentations, and as always, if you have questions, please visit them tonight at their poster.
Hi, I'm Ayan Chakrabarti, and the title of my paper is Color Constancy by Learning to Predict Chromaticity from Luminance. So what's color constancy? The color of an object that we observe, which is essentially the color of the light that reaches us, is loosely speaking a product of the color of the object itself and the color of the light illuminating the scene. What this means is that when we see the same object under different lights, the color we observe is going to change with the light. And yet the color we perceive is not. What this means is that our perceptual machinery is able to extract the true color of the object from the observed color and disambiguate the effect of the unknown illumination. Now this is what's called color constancy, and it's a fairly remarkable property of the human visual system. And what we'd like to do is to do this computationally, because it's useful for applications ranging from white balance and imagery lighting to using color as a reliable cue for illumination. So people have been working on this for a while, and it's essentially an ill-posed inverse problem. And what complicates matters is that the world we live in is pretty colorful. The distribution of true colors in natural scenes is in no way compact. And as a result of this, most modern methods for color constancy have sort of evolved to use complex features like spatial derivatives of color, semantic context, and so on. In this paper, we sort of buck the trend and go back to looking at individual pixels one at a time without looking at their spatial or semantic context. So to give you a brief overview of what the method does, essentially we'll be looking at one pixel at a time, and we'll use the pixel, and each pixel is going to essentially cast votes for the color of the scene illumination. And the way it's going to, and we're going to assume a single scene illuminant in this paper, and so we're just going to aggregate these votes, add up these votes across all pixels. So the core of the method is essentially a luminance to chromaticity classifier. What this means is that we're going to look at the luminance or average brightness value of a single pixel. You can think of this as looking at the pixel in the grayscale version of the observed image, and we're going to try and reason about the hue and saturation of that pixel. And there are two ways we're going to learn this classifier. The first is just very simply by using empirical histograms. And what's surprising is that even with this very simple method, we're actually able to match state-of-the-art performance of methods which use far more complex features. What is more, these histograms are actually interpretable. We can look at the relative distributions and sort of interpret them in the context of physics and color science. The second version in the second version, we're going to learn this end-to-end, and we're going to keep the same parametric form, but we're going to use stochastic gradient descent and back propagation. But remember, we're going to use this to learn a histogram, not a complex neural network. And it's also going to involve some form of dropout-like regularization strategy. So if you're interested in knowing more, and you're interested in sort of looking at the implications of this for natural image statistics and other applications, please stop by poster number 16. Thank you.
Hello, so I'm presenting backpropagation for energy-efficient neuromorphic computing. And this is work by myself, Steve Esser, and my colleagues at IBM Research, Kumar Appuswamy, Paul Merola, John Arthur, and Dharmender Moda. So the main motivation for our work is an interest in using neural networks to solve real-world problems in embedded systems such as cars or phones. Such systems, of course, have performance requirements like accuracy, and we have many examples where machine learning can deliver on that requirement. But they also have platform requirements like low power consumption, a small physical footprint, and real-time capabilities. And we believe that neuromorphic computing is well suited to deliver on that requirement. We're particularly interested in the True North neuromorphic chip. This chip has 1 million neurons, 256 million synapses, and can run using very little power, only 63 milliwatts. To get that low power capability, however, it requires spiking neurons, low precision discrete synapses, and places certain constraints on connectivity, all three things of which don't map that well to traditional machine learning, which likes to work in a continuous differentiable space. So how then can we bridge machine learning with neuromorphic computing? Well, one approach, a simple approach, would be to simply use conventional methods to train a network and then figure out some way to map that network to the hardware, to the constraints. That's not what we do, but it contrasts nicely with what we actually do, which is to take the hardware constraints and build them directly into the learning algorithm itself. So a constrain, then train approach. The training algorithm can then be used to produce a network that can be directly implemented on the hardware. The specifics of what we do, it involves using backpropagation, operating in a probabilistic space that has a direct interpretation in the hardware, and using this approach to train a network and then running that network on the true north hardware, we achieve near state-of-the-art accuracy on the MNIST dataset. We do this using 3 orders of magnitude less energy per classification than the next best low-power approach that we could find in the literature. And finally, we have some breaking results that didn't actually make it into the paper, but extending our approach to include convolution networks, we're able to achieve near state-of-the-art accuracy on a number of additional data sets, which you can see listed here. And if you'd like to learn more, please join us at poster 13 tonight for details, discussions, and a live demo running our networks. Thank you.
So my name is Jimmy Ba, and I'll talk about the wake-sleep attention model. So this is a joint work with my colleagues Ruslan Solakudinov, Roger Gross, and Brandon Fry. So deep conv nets are amazingly powerful. However, in practice, if the input is very high dimensional or volumetric data, they can be very expensive to evaluate. And recently, there have been some new development in the recurrent visual attention models. So some of the examples I show at the bottom of the slides. And those are very exciting new research directions because not only they overcome the scalability limitations of ConvNet in test time, but also they provide some great insight on what model has learned. And so what's the problem here for our next-gen vision system? So the learning signal for the RAM models are stochastic gradients estimated using the Monte Carlo samples. And oftentimes, they can be very noisy. And just from like the policy search and reinforcement learning, the high variance can hinder the learning or often make the learning unstable. So in this project, we set out to improve the learning algorithm for RAMs. So unlike the previous works that you sampled from the prior or the policy network, we introduced an additional inference network that's shown in the blue. So intuitively, that's saying, if I know I'm looking for some kind of bird that's penguin, and this knowledge should drive my attention to look for on the ground instead of the sky. So the additional inference network acts as a teacher to provide better guided search. And also, we directly optimized for the log likelihood instead of just a variation lower bound. And turned out with the limited samples, it's a tighter lower bound than the previous methods. And also, we investigated some of the control variable techniques or the baseline techniques to further reduce the variance of the gradient approximation. So with all the bells and whistles in our project, what's the final punchline? So the wake-sleep RAM models provide a great reduction in the variance estimation as shown in the first plot. And so this directly translates to a much better convergence speed in the training time. So we also experiment with a model that attends to different levels of the ConvNet, and the similar stories has been preserved. So we're trying to, so for this whole paper, we hope to provide some new inspirations for training the stochastic attention models and also for reinforcement learnings. So for more details, please come with our poster. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Seung-Hoon Oh, and this is joint work with Hyun-Hoon Oh and my advisor, Professor Boyoung Han. So this paper tackles one of the most central computer vision problem, semantic segmentation, which aims to assign dense semantic label to each pixel in the image. Especially, we are interested in semi-supervised learning of this problem, where we have a few training images with segmentation annotations, but much larger number of images with image level class labels. The main challenge in this problem is to train the model with this heterogeneous and unbalanced training data. So the key idea of this paper is to decompose the semantic segmentation to separate problems of classification and segmentation and learn individual network for each task separately. So the figure on the top describes the overall architecture of the proposed algorithm. Our network is composed of three parts: the classification network and segmentation network, and the bridging layers connecting the two networks. In this model, semantic segmentation is performed by separate but successive operations of classification and segmentation. So given an input image, the classification network identifies class labels associated with the image, and the segmentation network produces the foreground segmentation of each identified label. Given this architecture, training the model with hybrid annotation is easy and straightforward by training the classification network using the examples with segmentation annotations, with image level class labels, and training the segmentation network using the examples with segmentation annotations. The result shows that decomposing the classification and segmentation is very effective in this semi-supervised learning scenario. Our method outperforms the state-of-the-art semi-supervised semantic segmentation algorithms with substantial margin, even using much smaller number of strong annotations. Also, comparison to the approach to use only strong annotations for training show that this decoupled architecture is able to take advantage of both weak and strong annotations. To conclude, we proposed a novel decoupled architecture for semi-supervised semantic segmentation. Due to the simple nature of the proposed architecture, we expect that we can extend the similar principle to semi-supervised learning of the other structured prediction problems. So for more information, please come to our poster. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Keenan Morling, and this is joint work with Arun Chaganti, Percy Liang, and Chris Manning at the Stanford NLP Group. So I'm up here advertising this new framework we're proposing on-the-job learning. And the high-level idea is that if we allow ML models to query humans at test time in a principled way, we can solve a lot of the problems with deploying ML in the real world. So let's imagine that last night there was a natural disaster in New Orleans, and your lab decides to help by monitoring Twitter for useful information and passing the data you collect on to relief workers. Now you consider two methods to do this. First, you could use crowd workers to parse every tweet as it arrives, or second, you could use ML techniques like batch, online, or active learning. Now the benefit of the crowd is that their accuracy is constant in the number of examples that have been seen by the system, and so they can be deployed right away. However, every new tweet requires another human to look at it, and so your costs can grow unboundedly large and probably won't scale to Twitter. ML classifiers, on the other hand, don't require any human labor on each example, so they will scale to the Twitter fire hose. The catch is that ML classifiers need a certain minimum accuracy to be usefully deployable, which usually requires that humans label a large number of examples, which can be expensive and take a long time. So on-the-job learning is this new framework that gets the best of both worlds. If we let our ML model query humans at test time and learn from their responses before returning an answer, we can hit the ground running like a human and scale like a machine. So here's how this looks in practice. Let's imagine we're interested in finding the locations of resources and people out of tweets. So we're doing some sort of sequence labeling. So a tweet arrives, the model decides that the token George is ambiguous, and so it's going to launch two queries in parallel in order to hide the latency of these human labelers. A few seconds later, we get two responses back. The model decides it's still not certain enough, and so it launches an additional query on George and a query on Street, because that might be informative. A few seconds after that, the system is able to arrive at the correct labeling and turn it in. All right, so managing this asynchronous real-time querying is hard, and you have to balance latency, cost, and accuracy when making these decisions. We cast this as a game, and we use Bayesian decision theory to formulate the optimal choice. But since exhaustive calculation is intractable, we use Monte Carlo tree search with progressive widening to handle continuous time as an approximation. Our results are excellent. with human labor augmented by on-the-job learning going around 11 times as far as it would unassisted. So you should stop by our poster, which is number 15, and that's as a mnemonic this year. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Armand Jolin, and I'm here to present our joint work with Tomasz Mikolow on inferring algorithmic patterns with stack-augmented recurrent networks. Recurrent networks are a powerful model for sequence labeling prediction, which has obtained state-of-the-art performance on many tasks. However, it still has difficulty to learn complex patterns. For example, sequence generated by algorithms which contains memorizations are out of the reach of recurrent neural network. In this work, we propose an extension of RNN to be able to learn these algorithmic patterns. Our contribution is to add a structured memory to the recurrent neural network. It can learn what to write and when to read it. Its capacity is unbounded, which means that it can grow as the complexity of the input sequence gets more complex. And we mostly focus in this work on memory which are based on stacks, but it is easy to extend it to other memory topology like lists or tapes. As we show in the figure, the memory is controlled by an action variable, which is controlled by the hidden layer. The action that can be performed on the stacks are push a value on the top, pop it, or do nothing. The values stored on the stacks are nonlinear transformation of the hidden layer. So everything is continuous and can be trained with any optimization scheme, such as stochastic gradient descent. Here is an example of what is learned on the task of a binary addition. So the input are concatenation of binary addition of two numbers. And we provide no supervision for a model. Basically, it just has to predict the next token in the sequence. As you can see, it learns how to make its stacks collaborate, and some of the stacks learns to store the input numbers, while others learn to do how to do the carry. The code for this model is available online, and if you want to know more about how our model works, please come to our poster. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Junhyuk Oh, and this is a joint work with Xiaoxiao Guo, Hongnak Lei, Richard Lewis, and Satinder Singh. In this work, we consider a new video prediction problem where the future frames are dependent on control signals as well as the previous frames. We think this problem is important because this is learning a model of the dynamics of the agent-environment interaction in reinforcement learning context. To solve this problem, we proposed a new deep neural net architecture that performs action conditional future prediction based on convolutional neural networks and recurrent neural networks. We also present one application of our predictive model by improving exploration in the actual control problem. Here's the summary of our results. Our model can make realistic long-term predictions up to 30 to 500 future steps, depending on game domains. And the top figure shows some examples of predictions over 50 steps. And also, our model is used to improve exploration in the actual gameplay. The second figure shows heat maps of the player trajectory in game Pac-Man. And you can see that our method in the right side explores the entire map more extensively than random exploration. And this method improves DeepQ network, which is the state-of-the-art AI player on some game domains. Finally, our model can discover correlations between actions and distinguish controllable and uncontrollable objects in image by simply learning to predict future frames depending on actions. For more information, please come to our poster and see some demo videos of predictions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Yuval Harel, and this is joint work with Ron Meir and Manfred Opper. Our motivation is studying neural encoding and decoding in biological systems. So the setting is the following. We have a dynamic environment state, which is observed by an organism and encoded by sensory cells as a series of spikes, where the instantaneous firing rate of each cell is given by a tuning function, mapping the current state to a firing rate. These spikes are later decoded to produce behavior, and we model decoding as online filtering, producing the posterior distribution of the state conditioned on the full spike history. So in this model, we can ask two questions. First, how is decoding performed? And secondly, with the model of decoding, we can study optimal encoding as minimizing decoding error. Most existing work in this setting falls into three categories. It either uses numerical Monte Carlo methods, which tend to lead to limited analytic insight, or they assume a fixed state and study asymptotic results for infinite time decoding, or else they assume uniform coding. And what uniform coding means is that the tuning functions are placed on a uniform grid so that their sum is approximately constant. This assumption leads to a Gaussian posterior and a closed form filter. So in the more general case of non-uniform coding, we have a non-Gaussian posterior leading to an intractable infinite dimensional filter. We propose a method to overcome this difficulty as follows. We parameterize the cell population by distribution over tuning curve centers. This allows us to apply assumed density filtering to the resulting filter and gives us closed form equations for the posterior moments. Compared to the uniform coding case, these equations have an additional term corresponding to information from lack of spikes. This term causes the posterior to change between spikes and not just at spike times, as in the uniform coding case. To illustrate this, here is an example of decoding a simple one-dimensional process, which is shown here in black. The yellow dots are spikes, and their vertical location is the center of the tuning curve of the firing cell. The shaded area in blue shows the output of our filter, that is the posterior mean and posterior standard deviation. We can see that the posterior changes between spikes and moves away from the center of the population, reflecting the fact that absence of spikes indicates a low firing rate, which is obtained at the tails of the distribution. Our model also successfully explains physiologically observed encoding strategies, as illustrated in our poster, so please come see our poster for additional details. Thank you.
This concludes the first afternoon session. Join me in thanking all the speakers again for their presentations.
Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.